I would like to introduce Alice Slusher. Alice currently is our Master Gardener Foundation president, and has done a number of these talks on how to work with seeds, growing, planting, and those type of things. Always a delight to have you, Alice. Appreciate your willingness to share your time and knowledge, especially at a time where it's real busy. So, Alice, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Gary. Hey, what do you see on your screen? Just one slide?
Yes.
Okay, good. I wasn't sure which one I needed to choose. Okay, welcome everybody. I'm glad you're here today. We aren't here so much to learn how to save seeds, actually harvesting the seeds and saving them, but how to plan your garden to do that. And I'm going to put in another plug for our plant sale. All the information is at cowlitz.com, which is our website, /plant sale, and Gary can send you that information too. We now have the lists of all our plants up that you can look at before the marketplace opens on Sunday, May 9th. So, how about the first poll, Gary?
Happy to do that. Here you go. And so the poll says, reasons why you save seeds. Just check all those that apply. And again, it's anonymous. We don't know who's doing what. We just want to get a feel for why people save seeds. So if you'd go ahead and mark those, if you called in, and we'll see what we get. And I'll be happy to share those here. I'll give you about 20 more seconds. Okay, 5 seconds for those that haven't done it. There you go, Alice.
All righty. That's interesting. I think home gardeners are probably more interested in regrowing what they really like. But there's a lot of other things, other reasons that we may want to be saving seeds. And we're going to kind of touch on that too. So, let's see if I can make this work. Click. It's fun. It's economical. I don't know if you priced out seeds this year, but the seeds used to be a lot cheaper than they are now. Everything has gone up. You can grow stuff you can't grow in the stores. I mean, you can't go out and find a Brad's Atomic Tomato, which is really cool. It's torpedo shaped, like a little rocket, in the grocery stores, and it's a wonderful tomato, and you cannot get it in the stores. And the other really good thing is, if you're saving your own seeds, you'll find that they will become adapted to the microclimate in your area. And another reason is to preserve genetic diversity. When you only have, if you look in the store, how many different kinds of tomatoes can you get? Maybe 5, 6, 7, something like that. We need more diversity than that. And there are a couple of examples out there why you need that. Everybody knows about the Irish potato famine that led to the death or displacement of 2.5 million people in the 1840s. And the reason for that was potatoes aren't from Ireland, even though they grew them there. All Irish potatoes descended from a small amount of potatoes that were brought back to Europe from South America in the 1600s. And this potato monoculture proved susceptible to a disease that actually our tomatoes and potatoes get here too. But the South American farmers didn't have any trouble with their potatoes because they grew a whole bunch of different varieties of them. And the ones that, got the disease, they may have died, but they had plenty of other ones there to take it over. Uniformity in crops makes them really vulnerable to disease. Back in the 1970s, there was a U.S. corn blight too. And they, like 70% of the corn, 15% of all of our corn was lost. And they figured out that it was because of the corn varieties that were out there planted, all descended from the same parents. And the scientists got right on that and fixed it so that there are a lot of different kind of varieties out there now. But still, I think it depends on we home growers to really do our part too. So here's what we're going to talk about. Some of the seed stories that are out there, why they're important, some important concepts before you even start to decide to save seeds, planning for what to grow, and how to decide which plants that you think, which plants actually should be the ones that you save seeds from, and how to try to, as a gardener in a home, how to ensure seed diversity, integrity, and then we may touch on how to save the seeds, but that's actually a talk for later in the year. And we'll probably run out of time for that anyhow. Back before 1900, 50% of the people in the United States were farmers, and now there's just 2%. And where did their seeds come from? From grandma, grandpa, your neighbor. They didn't buy their seeds. They saved their seeds from the very best plants in their garden, and then they traded over the fence. It's funny, they were able to develop plants, these heirloom plants, that stood up very well to the growing conditions in their gardens, and it was a really great way of doing things. And all cultivated vegetables started out as wild plants. This is really cool. More than 10,000 years ago, we had hunter-gatherer ancestors, and they learned it was possible, finally, to save seeds that they liked from plants that they liked. And they could plant them in specially prepared areas where they camped for a while. And that allowed them to stay in one place and not have to spend all their time looking for these plants and following them as they came up. And what that did was free up a lot of time, and as a result, it heralded the birth of both agriculture and civilizations. And people now had the luxury to use that foraging and nomadic existence to create music, art, and make scientific discoveries. So it's pretty cool. And this is what prickly lettuce looked like back then, maybe not, but similar. And the ladies, or usually the ladies, they were the hunters, or the gatherers rather, they would find this and they liked it. They might have found one that tasted really good, and they kept the seeds from that once they realized what they were doing. And eventually, over the eons, this is what developed. Nature may have ended up with the same results, but selecting for seeds from the plants with the most desirable traits, our ancestors accomplished in a fraction of time what natural selection would have been able to do. So all of the plants we have now descended from wild plants. So back in the Abenaki corn, in the summer of 1816, it was so cold in New England that there was a snowstorm. It just killed everything, and so bad that the settlers had to move out to a better climate. There was one place, isolated place in northern Vermont, where the people couldn't get out, and it was the village of Calais. And luckily, the Indians there were able to give them corn. And this variety, Roy Callis's flint corn, was grown by the Abenaki tribe. And it was the only thing that stood between that village's death and their survival. And it was kept by the family since that time. And the reason this corn was the only one to survive was because it had been bred there by the Indians over, probably hundreds of years. And they bred it to be able to withstand harsh conditions, because this wasn't the only time that happened. But the family kept those seeds. They were lost for a while. They found them again, and the family ended up selling them to Fedco, which is a major seed company. And so they kept them alive then. Very few people realize that less than 10% of the vegetables and fruit varieties grown in the U.S. today around 1900 are still with us, and that is really scary. And there are a couple of reasons for that. In the 1940s, after the war, we started to hybridize. We wanted to make all these tomatoes. Do you remember when you were a kid? You get these tomatoes. They were kind of pink. They were all the same size. They had a mealy texture. We always called them greenhouse tomatoes, but they shipped really well. And then it just it really killed the desire for anybody to, we could have tomatoes. And the other bad thing is after the war, war took a lot of people, a lot of farmers off the field. They joined the service and did their part. And the women, a lot of the women ended up going into the cities to work in the munitions factories and other support jobs. So that took a lot of people away from the land. They were no longer farming, even though there was a tremendous need for seeds and for food. And manufacturers came out with practically nearly mechanized everything for farms. And what that led to was less need, less desire for some of the old seeds that people had, even though they may have been sold to the seed companies. And you know how seed companies, well, any company works. If a product sells, they're going to offer it again. If it doesn't sell, they get rid of it. And that's what happened with a lot of our seed supply. The seed companies would put out the different varieties. Nobody would buy them, so they wouldn't put them out again. And we lost a ton of seeds that way. And this is just a quick look. 1903, the seed companies, there were hundreds, look at that, 400, 3 something. And in just 80 years, we're down to this few varieties. It's really, really scary. And right now, 5 companies control 70% of the seeds being distributed. And the biggest company dropped 2,000 varieties, one quarter of all the seed varieties sold. And so our genetic diversity is disappearing, and we homeowners, or we home gardeners rather, are going to try to help bring it back. And I first prepared this talk back in the days when COVID didn't shut us down for a new endeavor that the library, our local library here in Longview, was trying to start, a seed library. And that is just an amazing concept. We're going to teach people how to save seeds that will grow well in our climate. And when they do that, they will be bringing them to the library will catalog them. Now, we'll talk a little bit later about how it's so hard to get diversity in our little home garden when we're only growing 2 tomatoes and, or two lettuce plants. But if everybody is growing, if you've got 30 people, 40 people, 50 people that are growing that same vegetable and they bring in their vegetables, then we've got a good handle on diversity. You could get a small packet of seeds next year that have the Roma tomato that you love, but 5 different growers grew it. So you've got a lot of diversity there, and that is a really good thing. And whoever owns the seeds controls your food supply, and I would like that to think that could be us. Now, we've got to go over just a little bit of science here, because if you don't, you're not going to understand what happens. With self-pollination, okay, first of all, this is the female part. This is the pistil. And this is the stamen. This is the anthers where the pollen is. And the pollen sticks to the stigma, grows a pollen tube down, and fertilizes the ovary, which turns into the seed. This usually occurs when in some plants where pollination occurs before the flower even opens. And a couple of examples of those are legumes, pea plants and things like that, and tomatoes, believe it or not, and lettuce. They actually pollinate themselves before the flower even opens. So they're good candidates for us to start with. Okay, the male and female, okay. But on the other hand, there's cross-pollination. Some plants need cross-pollination in some way. The pollen from one plant has to come over and pollinate the other plant, and insects do that, and wind does that. And seed growers should accept that many of the plants left to go to seed look really ugly and weedy, and these plants also take up a ton of room, and they tend to blow over in a strong wind. So we'll get to this a little bit later too, but you have to decide if you're growing a garden to eat it, for food, or if you're growing it to save seeds. It's possible to do both, but again, it can be challenging. Okay, plants from the same species can pollinate each other, and this can become very important. Tomatoes, eggplant, and cucurbits. Now, this is the genus. These two cannot pollinate each other because their species are different. Now, there's a list of, I need to put this in our handouts. Some squash, some cucumber, some melons can pollinate each other, and you can end up with some really weird results. But let me see if I have that. You know, I'll look as I go. So, open pollination, people are confused about this. Any non-hybrid variety, I should have probably started with the hybrid to tell you what that was, but it's scientifically, they bred them to create a particular variety. But the open pollination, they're not hybrid. They occur out in the air. All heirloom plants are open pollinated plants that have been there for a long time, very stable through many generations. If you plant seeds from an open pollinated plant, it usually breeds true, just like the parent plant, assuming that you have protected it from pollination from other plants. And like we were talking before, tomatoes, peas, beans, and lettuce are pretty good places to start because you don't have to worry too much about having pollen from another plant coming in and making your seed not be like the parent plant. And varieties are naturally occurring selections within a species, like you've got the tomato, and Tom Thumb is the variety. And you see that through every single vegetable you buy. You just don't buy a tomato plant. You buy it for the variety that has what you want. Now, the hybrids, this is done in laboratories. Hybrids result from cross between different varieties. And the first generation, which is usually what you'll see hybrid F1 that you'll say, I can't think of one that actually has it, but you'll see it on the seed packet. And those are seeds that you can't use again next year. If your plant was a hybrid, don't save those seeds. Useless. You'll end up with not the same thing as the parent plant. One factor that was most responsible for destroying garden diversity has been the shift to developing the hybrid varieties that don't breed true. They're worthless to save. They're more expensive to produce. They don't always tell you where the parents came from. It's something, that's why there's been such a shift to open pollination. It gives us a little bit more control. Now, this is what can happen. If you've got this garden out there and you think that you can grow butternut squash and cushaw and just save the seeds from them, this is what you might end up with. You can end up with any of these possibilities and even more. So the thing is, let's see, what are these? The butter squash. These are all cushaw. Do I have cushaw in there? I'm not sure what they are, but there are different, the peepos, which is the species, the cucurbita peepo, are the summer squashes, crookneck, zucchini, acorn squash, spaghetti. Those can all breed with each other, but the summer squash can't breed with the butternut squash because that's Cucurba moschata. And if that sounds confusing, I'm going to give you a list so that you know. Because if you grow two compatible species together, you're going to end up with a mess. And here's another example. Two different species of peppers that crossed, and you can end up with something like this. None of them look quite like the parent. And the same thing with tomatoes. This tomato, the resulting tomato, doesn't look anything like the parent, or tastes like it. That's the other thing. I grew a tomato. Well, actually, what it was a hybrid. And I did not intentionally save seeds. I didn't clean up my garden at the end of the year, and the seeds resprouted. By April, May of last year, I had a little forest of tomato plants where I think it was the sweet millions were. That's an F1 hybrid. And I pulled out most of them, but I let a couple go. And I let them grow, and they produced tomatoes that looked exactly like the sweet million, which is one of my favorite cherry tomatoes. It has really good flavor. But the taste was just, I mean, it wasn't bad, but there was really no flavor. the only saving grace was that the chickens loved them, they didn't care. They were just happy to get anything. However, if you are a person who likes to experiment, then that's what you might want to do. You may end up with some kind of wonderful hybrid. It's happened before. Depends what you want. We are going to be talking mostly about annuals. They complete their life cycle in one season. If you get a tomato, you plant it, the seed, or you buy the transplant, you plant it, it produces tomatoes, and then you can harvest the seeds. But some of the biennials, they complete their life cycle in 2 seasons. Like carrots, you plant the seed. Please, Nancy, please mute your mic. Carrot seeds produce leaves in the first year, but then they have to overwinter. Either in our area, you can just leave them in the ground. If in real cold areas, you have to take them out and put them in a root cellar and plant them again in the spring. But then they produce flowers in the spring, and that's when you can collect the seeds, although you've got to be really careful with carrots. Are you familiar with that wild plant, the weed that's called Queen Anne's lace? Or wild carrot? It's beautiful. It's got a white flat flower. Those can cross-pollinate with regular carrots, and that isn't a good thing because those don't taste good. They're very woody. They smell good, but they don't taste good, and it'll ruin your carrot seeds. There's a lot to take into consideration when you're doing this. And this is just an example of what you've got: the plants, the seeds, the seedlings coming up. You've got your cabbage. You either leave it in the ground or put it in cold storage. It starts coming up the next year. It produces a flower. It goes to seed. You save the seed, and it starts all over again. If you're looking for a good book as a reference, I would recommend this one, The Saving Seeds, The Complete Guide to Saving Seeds. It's on the resource list. If you're serious about this, I would suggest that you get the book. It's easy to read. There are other good ones out there too, but this one's a lot easier to read and gives you all the information you need to have. So if you're afraid to make mistakes, I wouldn't be. What's the worst that can happen? You can still eat it. And you might even make your own F1 hybrid. Have fun. It's fun to experiment in your own garden. So we're going to talk mostly about tomatoes, beans, peas, and lettuce because, like I said, they frequently self-pollinate and they complete their growth in one season. If you save seeds from an open-pollinated plant and there has not been any cross-pollination from another plant of the same species, you're going to have the same thing as what you started out with, which is your goal. That's everybody's goal here who's at this workshop. So the self-pollinating plants are really easy to grow. And tomatoes, those 4 don't need to be isolated, although you can do that if you're concerned about it. But to reduce the possibility of cross-pollination, we have some suggestions. Peppers, on the other hand, are a little trickier because they do cross-pollinate somewhat, but it's still pretty manageable. So are you planning to eat them? The plants, the produce from your plants, or are you planning to save the seeds? If you're going to do it to save the seeds, they need a lot more room. This is what a Swiss chard looks like when it's gone to seed. It's huge, just huge. And normally you plant your shards about, 5 inches apart, and you harvest them and everything. But if it was to grow tall like this, they would be crowded. They'd be more prone to disease. They'd be more prone to insect problems. And you really you want that plant that you're saving seeds from to have the best possible of everything because you want the next generation, next year, to be good. One thing you can do if you want to do corn is tricky too because it will easily cross-pollinate with anything the wind brings it. But it also needs the pollination and from other corn plants. And so you want to plant, if you have a small garden, you want to plant in blocks. Instead of having a one long row, you would plant like 5 by 5 plants in a row like that to help with pollination. And the other thing is you have to be very ruthless in a garden. If you're growing for seeds, if you've got one plant, I should have done this last year, except we weren't, I should have done it for a lot of reasons, but we weren't planning on saving the seeds. We had 5 pepper plants, all of the same variety. They were, I don't know what their name was, but they were a beautiful purple jalapeno. One of the plants, I could not get the aphids off it. I just couldn't. I tried everything, and I'm a master gardener, darn it. I'm going to save that plant. And I couldn't. I ended up throwing it away, but I didn't do it soon enough because the other plants ended up with somewhat aphids. What made that plant so susceptible to those aphids, I don't know. But that's one of the things you want to do. You want to I should have rogued out that plant, got rid of it early on. Especially if I was going to save seeds, because I would not want to save seeds from any pepper that thing produced. So you have criteria for this plants that you want to save seeds from, and yours may be different than mine. Some people are trying, to promote disease and pest-free plants, and what I did last year sure didn't help. Some people like to have the early ripening, so they would get the plant that produced the seeds from a plant very early in the season. Some like when they don't bolt, when they don't go to seed too fast, like say your lettuce would last longer. You would want to keep the seeds from the one that went to seed last. You might take the one with the plant with the best flavor. There's resistance to cracking. A lot of tomatoes crack, and you could save the seeds from the plant that didn't. If you're growing carrots or something like that, you want to take a look at the roots. Some people save for the hottest peppers, but a lot of these things, including early ripening and slow bolting, depend on the climate, the water, and the fertilizer used. So it's also what you've got going on in your plants. Hardiness is another big deal, like we heard about with the Abenaki corn. So let's take a look at this. Self-pollinating plants, they pollinate while they're still closed. Pollination takes place in this closed area here, and when it opens, it's already pollinated. With the tomato, there's the tomato flower, the fused anthers, the pollen is inside, as is the stigma, and it pollinates before it's open, usually. Less than 4% of all plants are self-pollinated, but those species are the ones we're talking about. These crops have very limited genetic composition, so that you can be fairly sure of getting plants true to type from the seeds you saved from an earlier generation of non-hybrid parent plants. The chance of tomatoes getting cross-pollinated is very small, only 2 to 4%. If you're willing to chance that, I do all the time, and it's never been a problem, and I pretty much only grow tomatoes and a few other things. But there are still ways to take care of that. One of the things that you can do to isolate your plants from pollen from other potential donators, you can do it several different ways. You can use blossom bags, netting for the ones that we're talking about growing. You can also do it by distance. And that's a little hard when you're growing stuff in a neighborhood because, you may not have that plant in your yard, but every single neighbor in your complex has it, and it could pollinate that way. So with peppers, because they can be pollinated easily from some other pepper, and that's really the only one that you have to worry about is bagging it. And there are ways to isolate it, and I'll show you. Here's a potential way. You can hand pollinate. As soon as that flower opens, you can hand pollinate. You would put a bag over it before the flower opened, wait till the flower opened, and then go in with a brush and brush that pollen all over the place, and then put the bag back on it for a couple days. And once the seed starts to form, then you're in good shape. You know that only that pepper pollinated that plant. And the same thing for just about every plant you've got there. And I got online. Oh, that's not this way. It's coming up here. The plants that cross-pollinate by wind or insects are really challenging. You don't want to end up with inbred plants, but hopefully the seed library concept will help. You may only have, 5 or 6 of a plant in your yard, but if 5, 10, 30 other people are growing it, you do have a chance for less, inbreeding. So you're going to want to isolate these flowers in some way, like I showed you. There's time isolation. You can plant early and late varieties. I've got some tomatoes that I ordered from our plant sale, actually, that open up that actually produce fruit at 55 days after I transplanted into the garden. And then I have other ones that I'm not going to get fruit for 90 days after I transplant them. And at my altitude, at my elevation, I'm not going to get them until, like November. We were eating the Brad's Atomic tomato in December because I pulled them off the plant before we got the first freeze. So you can also isolate them by distance, and there are charts that will tell you that. That's really hard in the neighborhood, probably a little bit easier if you're out in the country. The other thing you can do is create a windbreak. Buildings, fences, and hedges can help to influence the ability of pollen to travel through them. And again, the bagging and caging. And here's some examples. They're very simple. You can get, this looks like mosquito netting, which probably wouldn't work with wind pollination, but it would if something is pretty much primarily insect pollinated. This is one of those organza bags that you get for favors at weddings and showers. And you ask, where can I get those? Well, actually, Amazon has them. You can get 100 of these things, and they're 4x6, so they're pretty good size, for $9. Or, which is even cheaper, I don't know if you've ever seen row cover fabric. It's a spun polyester thing, kind of like if you're interfacing, if you're a sower, but you use it to protect plants from, insects or cold. But you can also make bags, either sew bags out of those or just cut a piece off and bag it around there. I will suggest that if you decide to do this, that you get cotton between the bag and the stem to create a pretty much impermeable barrier to enterprising insects. And here's some very serious people. They've decided that nothing is going to get their plants, and that's a lot of work for a home grower. But there is one thing that you can do. Say if you've got 2 pepper plants that you just love, or let's say you've got 4 planted in this bunch, and then you've got 4 planted in another bunch. You can do alternate day caging. You can make one of these cages and cover it with that row cover fabric, and you would put it over one set of plants while the other one's open to the wind and the insects. And then at night, when everything calms down, you take it off of the one set of plants you have and then put it on the other, and the ones you just had covered are open to the insects. And that'll work well in a home situation. And you can isolate plants by hand pollination. And if you like squash and zucchini and cucumber, this is something that you should really try. For one thing, in our summers, or rather our springs for the most part, our springs, we don't get good pollination. And you can see here, a lot of you have seen this. You see that this is the female. This has 2 different kind of blossoms in one plant. This is the male. It's just got the one long, let's see, I've come over here. One long straight stem. And this is the female. It's got a little baby squash thing there. That's the ovary. And I'll tell you how to do that. That's another better look at it to give you an idea. I'll bet you've had the problem in your garden that it looks like some zucchini or some cucumbers are starting to form, then they turn black and they just die. And you wonder why. Well, what happened was they never got fertilized. They start to form this, and then it says, oh, I can't make seeds. I'm just going to abort. And that's what happens. Those are aborted fruits. You can make sure that doesn't happen. And the other part of the problem is early at the beginning, when you first plant them, so many times the first ones out are males. You're never going to get a zucchini off a male. And at the beginning of the season, the male and the females, they don't open at the same time, and obviously that needs to happen. But eventually, when things warm up, you'll end up with males and females opening at the same time. But that still doesn't guarantee that they're going to get pollinated. And again, you can see these are males. That's a female. So here's what you do. Early in the morning, when you see a male and a female flower, early in the morning, they open up. You can tell when they're going to open up the night before, because flowers have that look. They're starting to ruffle up at the edges. You know that they're going to open up in the morning. So what you do is go out there, locate yourself a nice female plant that's opening up. Clip the male plant off, take off all the petals until you've got the male stamen exposed, and then gently rub the male stamen over the pistil on the female. And as soon as you've done that, that's a little bit closer look at it. Very easy to do. But the trick is, now you got to close it. There are a couple different ways you can close it. You can close the flower with a little tie. You can make a cone and cover it. I did this. This worked well, and I did this too. I did this with Scotch tape, just a piece of paper and Scotch tape around it so it couldn't open up. And I folded this over because some insects could get in there if they wanted to. But it works very well. This is what row cover fabric kind of looks like. That looks more like muslin to me, gauze. But it still would work. It won't let insects in. Again, there's probably cotton between this fabric and the tie to make sure no insects can get in there. So I think I may run through a little bit of the basics to saving seeds, but this is for later in the season. But this will give you an idea of what you're going to do. You harvest from the very best, very, very mature plants. You can't save seeds from an immature plant. The seeds have to be clean and dry in order to be able to be saved. If you try to save a damp seed, it's not going to work. After you've saved the seed and it's very, very dry, you have to use moisture, airtight containers. And you can also put in a desiccant, like those silica gel beads. You can make sure they're dry that way. But I save those little desiccant packets from different jars, like vitamins and stuff, and I put them in there with the jar. And label it, because you think you'll remember it, and you won't. Believe me. And there are a couple of tests. With the big seeds, you can crack it. If it cracks, it's dry. If it just bends, it doesn't. If it's one of the smaller seeds and you tap it and it kind of crushes, or it kind of splatters in different pieces and just shatters, it's dry. If it just kind of, squishes, it's not. I'm going to move on. So again, start small. Start with the tomatoes, the lettuce, the peas and beans, and you can try peppers too. Peppers, like I said, though, you've got to be really careful. Those you will absolutely need to bag the flowers on the plants that you want. And you may or may not get it right the first time. And just like with anything else like this, it's the best way is to just dive in and try it. I would not suggest trying broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage. These things all are able to cross-pollinize with each other, and you can end up with some inedible, well, that's not true. The chickens will eat them. Some really strange fruits, and you may not want to try that. It requires a lot of isolation. It requires large quantities of plants, and the pollen can travel for a great distance. So I would just stick with the first three. And I think that's all I'm going to cover. If you want to know how to save those seeds, the actual steps, that's something, a discussion for later. Or you can buy one of those books. I'm going to move myself down to, maybe not. here are the resources. The resources are on our website, and if you email Gary, he will be able to send you that, and he'll also be able to give you the video link, and give me a couple days and I'll get that up on YouTube. But the Seed to Seed is the one I was telling you about. That's a great book, and this Complete Guide to Saving Seeds is also good, but this is the one I like, the Complete Guide. The Seed to Seed it's very good, has a lot of information in it, but it's very, very technical and no pictures, and a lot of people didn't like it because of that. But anyhow, these are other resources that are available online for free, and I strongly suggest that you take a look at those if you're interested in this.